Hello, today is April 16th, 2025, and once again today I'll be reading from the United Church of Christ, a daily devotional. Um, Not necessarily again from a Christian perspective, but simply how, or using this devotion as a tool, a subject of discussion and thought provoking to see how it is we should be living in this world today. The devotion I'll be reading is written by Jennifer Ruth Lynn Garrison, and it's entitled Seeming Unseemly. And it's based upon the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 3, from the New Revised Standard Version. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. And then Jennifer writes, scholars always seem to say something, scholarly about this passage, like in first century Palestine, the act of wiping Jesus' feet with her hair would have been an act of unseemly immodesty by Mary. Honestly, I'm hard-pressed to think of any place or time where it would not be considered unseemly or immodest to pour a pound of perfume, which then, as now, is generally sold by the ounce, on a dinner guest and then massage that guest with one's hair. Adding to the unseemliness of this scene is the use of nard, which would have cost a year's wages and was imported from India. Even by today's travel methods, that's not exactly a hop, skip, and jump from Palestine. Mary's act of devotion irritated at least one of her fellow disciples and likely unsettled the rest of her guests, who now had their nostrils filled with an overwhelming redolence of nard instead of the dinner in front of them. Why did Mary do this, pour out her devotion in such a flagrant way? With the death of Jesus looming ever closer, I suspect she gave her all because she knew it was the last chance she would have. She knew the end was in sight, and so she did not hold back. Sometimes people pose the question, what would you do if you knew you had no more time left? Maybe a more interesting question is, what would you do if you knew Jesus had no more time left? Would you be willing to seem unseemly if you knew that today was your last day with the teacher? Would you be willing then at last to pour all of your love and all your worship, every last drop? And Jennifer's prayer. Christ Jesus, we have so little time left to worship you. Let us make every remaining moment count. Well, many things went through my mind as I read this devotion. Some things I struggled with. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about is what does it really mean to worship Jesus? Does it mean to pour out costly perfume in his honor? I don't think it's that as much. That's not that literal, although some people will take it that way. But what was the act? What was she intending? How was that intended in that time and place? The greater question for me is how do we, for those of us who are Christian, how do we worship Jesus? And I think looking at Jesus' life, it would be emulating him in how we treat one another, how we treat creation, and how we treat the most vulnerable among us, because that was mainly what he lived and breathed and taught. What greater act of worship can you give to anyone than to emulate their own life? I also was thinking of, Muhammad and Buddha, and how modern society, has taken to worshiping them when I think all three, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, did not want to be worshipped, but instead were trying to depict a way of life and a way of being in community with one another and with the entire creation. And what greater worship in any of those cases would it be than try to emulate that in the way we live in this world? What greater act of worship can we give to anyone than trying to emulate what they taught and lived in their own lives? Anyway, those were my thoughts when I read this. And I guess one other thing is their question about what would you do if you knew you had no more time left, or you knew Jesus had no more time left. I think we're in one of those moments where there's not much time left. So what would you do? What are you willing to do? How are you willing to let your life give worship to what you hold dear? What action can you take today? My thoughts. Yours may be different. Hope you have a good day, and hope to talk to you again tomorrow.